and welcome to the New York Studio School. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone to please turn off or silence all cell phones and pagers. It is now my great pleasure to introduce to you tonight's speaker, Pat Lipsky, who will be giving a talk entitled The Right Color. Pat Lipsky graduated from Cornell University with a BFA and Hunter with an MA, where she studied with Tony Smith. She began showing in 1970 at Andre Emmerich Gallery, where she had 5 exhibitions. In 1971, she had a one-woman exhibition at the Everson Museum. Her painting, Yaki, appeared as part of the opening exhibition of the Hirshhorn Museum in 1974. In 1984, she organized a 5-part lecture series with Clement Greenberg, which took place at NYU. The panel in which Mr. Greenberg spoke and which she moderated was called The Importance of Taste in Art. In the 1990s, the compositor Theodore Whitbread wrote a 3-part percussion piece based on 3 of her large black diamond canvases, which was performed at the Kitchen in Chelsea in 1999. In 2001, she received the Hassam Spire Award for work exhibited at the American Academy of Arts and Letters. The painting was acquired by the Houston Museum of Fine Arts. In 2008, a painting was shown at the National Academy Museum, receiving the Edwin Palmer Award. She is a 2-time recipient of the Pollock Krasner Grant, and 2 of her projects have received sponsorship from the New York Foundation for the Arts. Her paintings are represented in 24 museum collections, including the Hirshhorn, the Brooklyn, the Whitney, the San Francisco Museum of Art, the Fogg, and the Walker Art Center. She has had 28 one-woman shows. Please help me now welcome Pat Lipsky to the podium.
First, I want to thank the Studio School for inviting me to be part of their spring lecture series, hardly spring, and for helping me to prepare this evening's talk, and thank you all for coming. The title of my talk is The Right Color. Mark Rothko said that an expression of beauty was an expression of rightness, which of course ties in with my idea of the right color. Looking for the right color is searching for the next color in a composition so that all the shapes of the painting coexist successfully, while each carries its load in the composition. In his 6-volume book, À la recherche du temps perdu, which has been an ongoing influence, Marcel Proust was searching for lost time. Much of my life as a painter has been spent searching for colors which will harmoniously work together to create what Hans Hofmann called a color world. And here's Emerson writing on color, quote, "Thus, inevitably, does the universe wear our color. As I am, so I see," unquote. Here I am at age 16, painting in an art class. You can see my influences: Pointillism, Impressionism, and Modigliani. This painting, Modigliani was shown everywhere during that period. This painting started my career as the picture won first prize in the National Scholastic Art Award and was shown at the New York Coliseum. After I graduated with a master's degree from Hunter College in 1968, I started working on a series of paintings based on logarithmic progressions. These progressions, when plotted on a 2-dimensional surface, create curved lines. I worked on the curves mathematically with a slide rule and then drew them onto the canvas. The painting was a layer of diluted acrylic. I did several paintings like this at my first studio on East 90th Street. By loosening up the curves, I moved into my first wave paintings of 1969. Here are 3 images. This is spiked red. These were one-shot paintings. If they didn't work, they had to be thrown out. You really couldn't paint on them again and retain the freshness. I was influenced by the ideas from the book Zen and the Art of Archery by Eugene Herrigel when I did these. The writer talks about motor learning and control for any physical activity, including hitting your target. And these paintings were like that. Either you hit it or you blew it, in which case, as I said, the painting was discarded. The notion of error was built into the process. Some of these were shown in my first solo exhibition in 1970 at Andre Emmerich Gallery. When I made these pictures, although the colors were only moving laterally, I had to quickly arrive at the next right color while the paint was still wet. I sponged acrylic paint onto a wet canvas. It was a watercolor technique. Usually, I saw the next color in my mind, and my conscious job was to mix it. Here, the image is getting as blurred and amorphous as possible. As you can see, I had, between 1969 and 1970, loosened the structure and allowed the sponged wet acrylic to have more play. The edges were my tribute to Pollock. Regarding these pictures, here's what I wrote in a memoir from 1980, quote, "I got a studio on 11th Street. I loved going down there. I would stop at Chock full of Nuts and get 2 coffees to go. The paintings from the night before would be lying on the floor. I'd climb on top of the ladder and look down at them. I remember the smell and the feel of the canvas. I had never been happier. I'd see how the paintings looked, whether I'd been on or off the day before. Then I'd hang them up on the wall and see how they looked up. Then I'd tack some new canvas onto the floor and start working. The canvas would be blank, just like a big piece of white paper on the floor. I'd sponge the whole thing down with water. Then I'd start pouring color onto the canvas. I had these wonderful silk sponges of different sizes that I'd collected. I'd dance, I'd play, I'd rub." This is an image of a painting that I did with oil paint, using the same kind of structure as the pictures we were just looking at. I'd been trained in oil from the age of 7, and although acrylic was the hot new thing in graduate school and had some wonderful properties, especially for staining, that is, painting on unprepared cotton duck, I couldn't quite get oil out of my system and went back and forth for a while, as you'll see, before I finally settled on oil in the 80s. This is a very big painting, as you can see, 183 inches. Here, I've moved back to acrylic in a painting based on a grid format. At the time, I suddenly had a strong instinct to work with this structure and went with it. Later, I discovered that other painters, Richter and Bartlett, for example, unbeknownst to me, were working with grids at the same time. And here I was drawing into the grid with varying sized strips of masking tape, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch. The different size strips made different kinds of lines on the painting. This painting is based on the palette of Boating by Manet at the Met from 1874, painted 101 years before my canvas. I am especially fond of the light green blue sea color in the Manet, and there I am with my version of it. This, I hope I don't trip. You know, these kinds of colors. This came out of a small watercolor study. I would do several watercolor studies and then pick one that I thought promising. The large paintings were done on the floor and stretched afterwards, giving me some play on the edge. I would duplicate each color from the watercolor in acrylic and then pour the paint into numbered jars, in this case 144. The paint was sponged and brushed onto the canvas, 10 or more layers of each color, in an attempt to create a blurred, velvety effect. This is the last painting of mine that my father saw. What he said about it was, quote, "To me, it looks like dancing," unquote. I'm showing you a few images from the early 80s. In general, the Reagan years, the 80s, was not my favorite decade. This is owned by Ezra Levin, who's in the audience tonight. This and the next two images are of oil paintings in which I was clearly working with an enclosing border. Something Tony Smith had discussed at Hunter was the difference between enclosed space and slice of life, and this has been an ongoing concern in my paintings. Degas is a master of slice of life, cropping images at the edge, giving the illusion that the picture is a piece of a larger whole, while Ken Nolan's targets are examples of enclosed. Even Rothko's paintings can be viewed as enclosed space. A stated border with a more extended image is one of the things I am working with here. Smith said he preferred enclosed space because it clearly showed that the artist had made the decision about exactly where the painting ended. However, one of the dangers of listening to your professor is that, as in this case, he did not practice what he preached. Several of his paintings are slice of life. I used an electric sander in the painting, an idea I got from Smith's treatment of his cubi sculptures. As you can see in this yellowish painting, I am moving back to a more structured image similar to the mid-70s pictures. This was close to the kind of drawings I did at the time. This is an asymmetrical, irregular grid-like picture. The title refers to my mother as a memory of her early years, painted after she died in 1989. The CG in the title refers to the art critic Clement Greenberg, and the painting came out of discussions he and I had about Titian's use of alizarin crimson, also called magenta, red, purple, several names for this color. There had been a show of Titian's work at the National Gallery in Washington, I think it was 1990, that Greenberg and I had both seen. This is a painting where the ideas of nuance and close value color become the subject. Close value color, as many of you know, is staying within the range of one particular color rather than working with contrast or up and down the tonal scale. The actual word nuance means a subtle distinction or variation, which expresses one of the things I was attempting here. I was interested in emphasizing small differences between colors. Oh, this is a little hard to see. The sizes are from point to point on the diamonds. The painting takes its title from a 1961 poem by Sylvia Plath. This is the first diamond-shaped canvas I am showing you. Throughout the 90s, I worked with this structure because I thought it activated the small rectangles of color more than a square orientation would, although I worked on the canvas in every direction when I was painting. I also connected with the diamond-shaped canvases of Mondrian. This picture started with a lavender underpainting that can be slightly seen in the actual canvas, in the same way that Chardin's black grounds inform the top layer of color in his late still lifes. The painting also makes a reference back to For Leslie that I just showed you, but this time I'm working with oil. This was made in Paris. I was covered in stains of brown when I went to the neighborhood cafe for a coffee. This is a larger version, which was then painted in New York. I chose to work with the color brown because it was the color I liked least, the color I'd always avoided. I wanted to see what I could find out about it. Throughout the 90s, I continued with these close-value color paintings, which were made with so many layers of oil paint applied with a palette knife that the edges where the small rectangles met became ridged and were an important element in the total image, that is, the ridged edges. The last color I tackled was black, along with yellow, often considered to be the most difficult. One of the reasons for this is that the black pigments are made with coarser granules than other colors, causing the variety of blacks to sink into the layers beneath, which can dull the surface. I had to work with this limitation, coddling the blacks along, sometimes coating them with varnish. Mars, ivory, peach, lamp, bone were the greater part of my expressive cachet for about 5 years. For me, putting one black next to another started to take on the illusion of using all colors. For example, I could make Mars black look almost red if I put it next to ivory. Payne's gray looked like light blue next to lamp black, and lamp black looked almost warm next to ivory. It was, I imagine, similar to composing for one instrument if you are a composer. And that is what the composer, Theodore Whipward, who is here tonight, Ted? It's my corny... Thank you. Ted composed a 3-part percussion piece after the last 3 paintings of this series, called Dark Love, after this canvas. Here's something Ted wrote for the playbill percussion performance, which had the paintings on view at the Kitchen in Chelsea in 1999. Quote, "And from the first time I saw them, I began thinking of how they might sound. Percussion would clearly be the medium of choice." This is the third of the 3-part painting series and the subject of the third movement of Whipward's composition. In 1998, I moved to a new studio in Chelsea, which starts the work of the last 10 years. The title here is Are You Here? And it refers to a friend who had died the year before. I wondered if his spirit were in my new studio. In this painting, I am working with what I'd learned using blacks in the reproductions of paintings we just looked at, while using an abstract expressionist paint handling. The structured rectilinear format relates to many of my other pictures. The masking tape that was on while I was working stayed on in the end because I thought it added to the picture. One of the things I was experimenting with here was the thinness and thickness of the rectilinear shapes. These are among the pictures in my first exhibition at Chelsea, at Chelsea at Elizabeth Harris Gallery in 1999. This painting was done on an orange ground, and the underpainting comes through in places, particularly between the lines. When I finished it, I identified what I had created as the feeling in my mother's dining room. Starting in 1990, I made several trips to Paris and the surrounding areas because I'd become interested in early Gothic French cathedrals and stained glass windows. I'd read a lot about Bourges Cathedral and then finally visited in 2000. This painting continues my interest in the windows, although I realize the theme might read as American, because the predominant colors in the stained glass at Saint-Chapelle Chart and others is red and blue. This is a painting about off-whites and blues, quote, which are distant from a preconceived notion of blueness, unquote, as one critic put it. Also, as the title suggests, the attempt here is to see what happens if none of the blues touch or invade each other. Around this time, I started making the paint myself from pigment and linseed oil. Here, the red half columns do invade each other. In addition to the experiment with structure, the painting continues my interest in both close value color and red and blue, with 7 different reds, 6 off-whites, and 4 blues. For a long time, I had been influenced by Bach's music, and Ken Johnson picked up on this in a review of my 2003 exhibition. Quote, "The effect is polyrhythmic in 3 dimensions," unquote. And also, quote, "Miss Lipsky's compositions distantly resemble piano keyboards, enhancing the feeling of Bach-like musicality." In 2004, I first became aware of the extent to which my reading of Proust was influencing my painting when I began work on a group of 9 canvases that circulated versions of 4 colors in 9 locations on the canvas. While applying red paint to the first canvas in the series, the tune from the song Red River Valley suddenly came to mind, and with it, a world forgotten for many years, centered on playing the piano and singing folk songs with my family as a child. The particular color of red on my palette opened these memories, resulting in an experience that Proust describes as involuntary memory. As a testament to the experience, I called the series Red River Valley. Each of the 9 paintings has a white border because each painting came from a small colored study on white paper. The surfaces now are smooth. There is no interference in the paint handling. I had learned a great deal from studying early Netherlandish paintings in Bruges, Ghent, Brussels, and Paris. The 4 colors were variations on red, blue, black, and white. I thought it would be interesting to see what effect, if any, location had on the way the colors read. There were only 9 permutations possible, hence 9 paintings to the series. What I discovered was that each color could work in each of the 9 locations if I got its modulation right. That is, if it were the right variation of the color. As Clement Greenberg said, any painting can work if the color is good enough. Here you can see I'd switched the outer red half columns to the shorter position and inverted the colors in the middle column. The sizes of each of the 9 canvases vary slightly, as do all the internal proportions. Here, the red has moved to the top larger panels, which are unequal in size. The red touches off the off-whites below at slightly different levels. That is, the paintings are asymmetrical. another model for this being the human face. This was done after the show to see what the image would be like without the border. Based on this canvas, despite Tony Smith's early advice, I decided that the border was not necessary in future paintings. This painting was done in two phases, the left side in 2003 and the right in 2008. The left side, a separate painting, had been sent to Bosnia by the State Department, and when it came back, I thought that I could make a better picture if I repeated the image in a second canvas with the exact same structure and colors, but this time with the bars going in the opposite direction. This then became one image. I'm going to diverge from my abstract paintings for a moment to show you a series of gouaches on paper that I did from stained glass scenes. There are usually 10 or 12 of these small scenes in any given large 13th and 12th century French window. These were seen on my trips to Troyes, Le Mans, Poitiers, Chartres, Bourges, Sens, Cluny, and even at the Louvre between 2000 and 2004. And this is an installation shot from the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, where 80 of the vitro paintings were shown in 2006. I would spend the day at the cathedral drawing the scenes that interested me and writing down the colors. Then when I got back to the apartment where I was staying in Paris, I would paint the gouaches from the drawings and colored notations I just made. Bourges has windows lower than those of other cathedrals, so they were easier to see. The black line down the middle of this work reminded me of a Max Beckmann diptych. In the original, the line is actually lead that is holding the two panels of glass together. This image is very meta insofar as it is art referring to art, a picture of sculptors making a sculpture on the lower right and left, and two stonemasons building a gate in the middle. The Sylvester window must have been paid for by the Stonemasons Guild, so this scene is a medieval advertisement. I was very interested in the flowery decorations around the central images, which are called the mosaic. They reminded me of patterns in Matisse, and I was sure he had seen them. I was surprised then to learn when I read Hilary Sperling's biography of Matisse that he didn't seem particularly aware of French glass. This is one of the earliest scenes I worked from, right in Paris at Sainte-Chapelle. Most of the other cathedrals were within a 2-hour radius of Paris. The slight mountains in the upper section reminded me of Comme Lux et Volupté. I loved the idea of a bad, rich window. Although the rich, I have to say, always seemed more lively in these scenes. The good people were kind of boring and usually dressed in white. I was taken by this particular image of the leper with the dogs at his feet. And I have to admit that my first thought was not of art, but of a Lenny Bruce joke about lepers walking down Fifth Avenue. I also enjoyed the left side brickwork, which made me think of a Noland. The upper section in this image reminded me of a Paul Klee, the abstracted image at the top. To my eye, the figure of Mary at the bottom was a dead ringer for a Balthus. A slightly different version of the same subject is at Louvre Notre Dame de Strasbourg, so I ended up doing two pictures with the same image of Mary wiping Christ's feet with her hair. I loved the charming woman in red stockings on a divan circa 1300, trying to seduce the would-be saint, Philetus, who at the very last moment is saved by God. This is the second image from the Tree of Jesse window at Troyes, and it reminded me of Chagall's Fiddler. What I wrote about these in a statement from 2001 was, quote, "They tap into a purer self, a childlike self that would have been charmed by these beautiful colored vitraux," unquote. They are both kaleidoscopic and very theatrical, not like my abstract paintings. That's another view of me working on the preparation. I had thought these anonymous painters were the original French fauve artists, that they showed extraordinary skill in high-key color. I wasn't interested in the stories at first. I looked at the windows the way I look at abstract paintings. I began to read about their meanings only later. In a way, the whole assignment that I gave myself was an excuse for basking in the beauty of the early glass. This statement from a Roman Antonius seems to sum up the medieval idea too, quote, "If the picture is good enough, who cares who made it," unquote. I'm going to show you some works on paper and prints. This study is typical of my abstract paintings on paper, casual and rougher than my work on canvas, almost like taking notes or a diary. This etching was made by painting tar on the individual plates where the color was going to be, giving the surface of the print a quality similar to that of layered oil painting. Porphyry, as some of you know, is the name of a red-purple stone that the columns at St. Mark's Cathedral in Venice are made from. Not all of the columns, some of the columns. I tried to simulate the color in this etching. The first plate of the print had the reddish color everywhere that you see it, and also under the blacks. This comes out of a painting of mine with the same title from 2002. I did the large painting first and then went back to the image in the monotype. Manet often made prints of his paintings after the fact, which is where I got the idea. The Lincoln Center print is a 16-color silkscreen that is from a drawing I did of upside-down piano keys. I decided to confront piano key reference head-on here. Sometimes I like to remember what it feels like to let my hand show. In my paintings of the last several years, I've specifically been dealing with the whole, flat, non-hierarchical plane. In that sense, in addition to being synoptic, these paintings are democratic. It's not a new idea. Here's a statement from Augustine from his book of De Musica, 389 AD. Quote, "The higher things are those in which equality resides, supreme, unshaken, unchangeable, eternal." End quote. This is Lucy and Mandible. When a painting succeeds, nothing dominates, nothing fixes too quickly, nothing settles. This allows for different readings. The flat surface doesn't impose a figure-ground relationship. One hopes that each shape connects with its color, as the proportions and colors have to be convincing for the painting to succeed. A three-part painting that was done on 3 separate walls of my studio. I was circulating colors as I had in the Red River Valley series, but here there is no limit to the number of colors, and the palette has changed. One of the ideas I have been focusing on in the last few years is the notion that there are many more colors than are named in our English vocabulary. I call these no-name colors, ones that defy naming and unfortunately often reproduction. These paintings feature small differences that become important in context. Like the earlier series, they are not symmetrical. They are built up with countless layers that become, in effect, the history of how hard it is to get the right color. When Titian was asked how he achieved the quality in his work, he said, quote, 30, 40 glazes. Proust, writing about the sea, had this Heraclitan insight, quote, I never saw the same sea twice, unquote. The sea itself looks different, depending on the sky, the light, the time of day. I was thinking about that when I painted this picture, and also about how color, too, changes, depending upon what is next to it. And like the sea, it's almost impossible to get the same color twice. The largest number of metaphors in Proust's 6-volume work are about the sea, which obviously influenced this title. This title refers to Ingres' Odalisque in Versailles, 1824 to 34 at the Metropolitan Museum. Because of its mastery of close-value off-whites, I had admired the Ingres for many years, and it was a takeoff point for this painting. This is a reference to the rich colors I had seen in Bellini's work on several trips to Venice. In the installation shot you saw before from 2006, the red bars were at the top. Dare I go back? In 2008, the painting was in a group show, and I decided that the orientation with the red at the bottom worked better. To get closer to the surfaces of Venetian painting, I started to add mica dust to the paint, the closest thing we have to pulverized glass that the Venetians used. The last images I'm going to show you were done after the 2006 show. Cobalt. The title refers to the blue of the outer columns, which because of the nature of the pigment cobalt had to be painted over and over to get the color smooth. Perhaps you saw it last summer at the National Academy Museum. This was done at the same time as cobalt. The edges between the shapes are continuously rubbed with cotton-tipped applicators so that they read as soft, not hard. I was interested in blurred, soft edges even in the early abstract paintings when I used sponges to get the effect. A small picture that took place over a 3-year period. It's named for a character in T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Quote, if you see dear Mrs. Equitone, tell her I bring the horoscope myself. One must be so careful these days. Unquote. I worked on this small picture for so long, I thought I was Mrs. Equitone. The painting was influenced by the color in Blind Orient, Searching for the Rising Sun by Poussin and Burnett. The date refers to the day one of my great-grandmothers arrived in the United States. The year is 1903. I discovered this when my cousin Seth, who's right over there, Seth, stand up. Yes! Seth actually looked through thousands of pages from Ellis Island and found our great-grandmother's entry into the United States, and I thought that really deserved itself has diminished, as we've seen in so many Whitney biennials and galleries around Chelsea, although not here at the studio school. When I first started painting, I was inspired by Rothko, Hoffman, Lewis, Nolan, all colorists, all coming out of the work of Matisse. Where are their equals now? At the same time, you've probably noticed that there has been a devaluation of beauty. This was perhaps first stated in print by Robert Hughes in Time magazine, 1986, in his famous pan of the Morris Louis retrospective at the Modern, which ended with this question, quote, "But is beauty enough?" Unquote. For over 500 years, beauty had been enough. Now Hughes wondered. The showman trickster, Marcel Duchamp, who said he hated art and museums, preferred chess and breathing, considered the shovel art, to my mind, the perfect object with which to handle his work. First stated this question. When I respond to a Titian, Bellini, Rembrandt, or Pollock, it's the beauty, the expression of brightness, as Rothko put it, and that I opened my talk with, that is responsible. And that's what I had the audacity to use a word made popular by our new president, to attempt in my own work. For me, that is enough. Any questions?
I'm interested that you have just been to somebody else's studio, but Sean Scully's studio, talking about strokes.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
So we went to Sean Scully's studio today, talking about strokes, and I'm interested in the regular patterning that you're using and how the breaking up high and low is pulling and pushing things in and out.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of the Greek vases.
Greek vases, that's fantastic. Well, you know, that's very interesting what you said. I love that. I love Greek vases. I don't see the thing about pulling in and out, but I believe it because a lot of people have mentioned it to me. And for some reason, the color dominates my vision so much that I actually can't see it. But I believe it's there because it's been mentioned to me over and over again. Yes?
I was interested in the relationship with some of the things you were reading, to the things you were painting. And I was thinking when you had that painting that you said was influenced by Cruise the Sea, that we never see the same sea twice. In terms of capturing something in a painting, I have a feeling of a very distinct sea looking at that painting, that particular kind of light, particular time of day. Are you aiming for a kind of particularity, or are you aiming for the sensation of the general that Proust is talking about, that ever-change, situation? Is it more that there's this a yearning towards something more specific, or something more universal in the painting?
No, I think more universal. I don't think more specific. I have to admit that I did go out to Southampton in the winter to check out the sea color. I was, very much influenced by his writing about the sea. I also had spent a lot of time looking at the ocean, throughout my life. And I thought that the sea color was olive green and terre verte. That's what with a little black. So, that was part of it, but it was not one particular thing. It was more of a total idea. Yeah.
Is it disturbing to you to see the reproductions with the color not as accurate as you intended them to be?
Yeah, it's a total disaster. It's said that the best art defies reproduction. The irony is that I'm working with such small intervals of change, and I would change a color 10 times to get it what I think of in my mind as 1 degree lighter or 1 degree darker or 1 degree more, something or other, and then the end result is that it's reproduced. So I just don't know what to do with that. The black paintings. After 5 or 6 years, I actually couldn't take the issue of reproduction any longer. I'd have to go there, and sit there and try to make something look like the actual painting. So, in a sense, reproduction is not a wonderful thing. I'm sure you've had that experience yourself, haven't you? Yeah, in fact, what I'm thinking of is that I had a slightly violent reaction in 1970. I went to the Grand Palais to see this great Matisse show. Matisse wasn't that well known in the United States at that time. And I had been looking at Matisse for years in all my books. I had a lot of books. And then I got there and I was really very disappointed because my whole idea outside of the modern was these reproductions, and the paintings didn't look like that. So, really in the end, you always have to see the paintings. Yeah. Yes?
What was the Lenny Bruce show?
Oh, I can't tell it. I'll tell you later. No, I went over it with my assistant, and she said I can't tell it. Yeah.
In your wave paintings, you mentioned how it was exact and it was good, otherwise it was thrown away.
Right.
Then you sort of suggested a progression painting, including the one where the painting that involved masking tape, and you chose not to take the masking tape off. Now, was it the fear that if you took the masking tape off, it would not be working?
No. Those are two separate things, but I'd love to illuminate it. The early paintings, the early paintings had to do with a technique which is called staining that I mentioned was, that you work right into the unprimed canvas. And it was very, very exciting because as all art students know and painters know, you have to prime the canvas and you have to wait for the primer to dry and you have to put 3 layers on. Suddenly you didn't have to do anything. All you had to do was roll the canvas down. Now, it came directly out of Jackson Pollock, obviously. So there was that, extraordinary immediacy. But you knew, I knew with those paintings that I was doing that I couldn't always get it. It was every time I did one of those paintings, it wasn't going to work out, and I knew that. I tried working into them again, but it just didn't have that luminosity. So I would throw away maybe 2/3 and keep 1/3. And that was just what it was. As far as the masking tape, it does have a similarity. The masking tape does have sort of a little bit of the same, of a similar attitude, is that I was just painting the picture. It had, masking tape on it. And then I looked at it and I thought, God, that looks terrific. It's not going to look as good when I take the masking tape off. So my work is always generated by, how it looks. Or as Clement Greenberg, the way Clement Greenberg referred to that is, everything is the result. What's the result? So if it looked great that day with the masking tape, I thought, well, I can't risk taking that off. I'll never get it back on. My concern, quite frankly, now is whether it stayed on. Someone owns it. I haven't heard from them. I think that's a good sign. Did you want to ask a question? Yeah.
We're talking a lot about color, which is obviously the topic of the lecture, and yet I'm curious how you decide about the underlying geometry of the paintings. It has a huge impact on how the colors are perceived and
Right.
relate to each other.
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. It's gone over time, and the 5-panel pictures that you saw at the end, of the last few years, came about slowly. First there were many columns, and then I got this idea of gradating sort of steps. And actually, this was in an article. I just remembered it now. I forgot to mention it earlier. Is that I had this professor at Cornell named Alan Solomon, and he showed us Seurat's painting called The Clown, which is at the Musée d'Orsay. And, it's the one where the figure is riding on horseback, and everything goes up in arabesque. And that was a very, very important image in my mind. And I think one of the reasons those recent paintings go up in arabesque has to do with the Seurat. That's been the structure and creating structures has always been more difficult for me than the color. I could do the color. I knew I could do the color. Or I thought I could do the color. Let's say it's a little harder than I thought, actually. But the structure was something that I really had to, plumb the depths for. Yeah.
It seems like over time you've progressed toward more very precise symmetry. So I'm wondering what your feelings are in relation to asymmetry and symmetry and movement and stillness, how those relate, what your attraction is to one or the other.
Yeah, I found it fascinating to put the talk together for that reason, because I hadn't really reviewed the entire oeuvre before. And, the work has obviously changed in that idea of precision. I don't really know, that's just how it went, the idea is that, as, one of my gods, Proust, said, you just dig down into yourself, you see what comes up. You don't know what's going to come up, but you just have to go and find out, and that's the way the work went, so I went with it. It's like the work is taking you along with it, in a sense.
Perhaps as a follow-on to both of those, with the exception of the stained glass windows paintings, you started out logarithmically and then you've gone, say, sort of mathematically or something. Is there something?
What was the last part?
I say, even in your abstracts, there's sort of a mathematical kind of division to them. Is there something that you can describe as almost scientific, the logarithms?
Well, I made the math team. My mother couldn't believe it. So I was very good at math. I think I have some mathematical something. I don't know, because you're absolutely right. The first image I showed you actually of an abstract painting was based on a logarithmic progression. And in that sense, the last paintings kind of connected, because I'm standing there measuring 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, how does this side relate to that side? It's just a natural way, for me to function. I like using math. I think I like the definiteness of it. I like the fact that I can control it in some ways, that, this is a 3/4 of an inch. I get that, I just have to get that, maybe I'll do that on the other side, but less, so it's sort of fun. It's a little like playing with the colors, in the sense that I flip the proportions around a little bit. Yeah.
Seeing all these different periods that I hadn't seen before, and seeing the black paintings that I got so involved with for a while as a composer, it really struck me that only and specifically in Dark Love, in that particular painting, did the grid get so skewed.
Yeah.
When you went into other grids later, they snapped back. And in fact, the other black painting we showed in Memoriam CG is, very parallel to the edges, so that there's a sort of a column to that. But that first painting, Dark Love, is just so full of emotion. It's so troubled because of the way it's skewed. And I wonder whether maybe working with black, the stress of working with black or something.
No, it's great. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, we called it askew grids, actually. People who I was talking with at the time, and I only showed you 2. I mean, there were, I don't know, 30 or something like that. And I first started the askew idea, in the early 90s, and, it might sound a little obvious. The idea was that I thought everything was askew, and I wanted to express the askewness. I mean, I remember, I'd go to the bank and there'd be like somebody sleeping in the bank teller's area, I mean, people were lying on the street. I mean, it was a very strange world that, from my childhood to the situation in New York with the homeless, and everything just seemed askew to me. And so I thought, well, I'm going to, tilt everything. I felt vertiginous. And that one is, very much so. The CG painting, it was tilting more. That was my memoriam to my friend's death, and I painted it over 4 or 5 years, and it got straighter as I went along. I straightened it out. Okay, well, yes.
You said something about ground and light, and being the closest thing to ground and glass. Why not ground and glass?
No, you can't get it. I called. No, what happened was, we all saw the show. It was at the National Gallery in Washington. It was Bellini, Titian, and Giorgione. And I had seen some of the paintings in Europe. I was very excited to see them here. I never thought that would happen. And, there was a whole chapter in the catalog about Titian's technique. And, it made sense because that island, I think it's called Murano, has glass. They make glass there. And so the Venetians were using the ground glass in their paint. Maybe I could grind my own glass. But so I was dealing with, I don't know. I've stepped on so many nails. I don't know, grinding glass is a little over the top. But I called Kremer, Kremer pigment, and I actually had an email correspondence with Herr Dr. Kremer from Germany. And he said that this was the closest thing to glass. I agree with you, quite frankly, that glass would be better. I mean, if you see the paintings, I don't know if any of you ever noticed it, they have little tiny spots that sort of shine a little bit. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming.